Hi, I'm Adam, and today I'm going to show you how we take a piece of this and we turn it into a horn nock for an English longbow. Before we get started, this is something we actually teach on our 2-day bow making course. If you're interested in that in any way, I'll put a link to that in the description of this video. Otherwise, feel free to build along with us. But first, why are we doing this at all? On a practical basis, horn is fitted to bows because it literally protects the wood from the string, because on the heavier draw weights of military spec bows, it can act like a saw and actually cut into the wood. It's more relevant in the medieval period when draw weights started to increase. Now, of course, nowadays it's not as relevant because we're not necessarily always shooting military bows when we're doing target practice. But today, as I'm going to be fitting it to a laminate, it does actually help by protecting the tips from the constant shock of being released, and therefore protecting the glue lines to stop any unwanted delaminations. Okay, let's get started. First job, I'm going to cut this down into smaller manageable pieces, and then I'm going to use a cone-shaped drill to create the socket to fit onto the tip of the bow. I'm using a fairly standard cone-shaped drill bit which you can buy from most hardware stores. When you're drilling into the horn, it's important to make sure that the drill bit lines up dead straight when looking at it at all angles. You want to leave plenty of meat to play with when you start shaping later, so you don't accidentally go through the hole which you just drilled. As you can see, it's also very dusty and smoky, so enjoy the smell. Okay, it smells delicious, and I'd say that's about there. Taking it out the vise with a quick clean out, and we've drilled a 10mm hole, which is more than enough for the bow which we're making. Back on the workbench, and here's a closer look at the horn we've just drilled and the bits which I've used. I've used the drill bit as a template to mark up the tip of the bow, and I can obviously measure how deep the horn is, so I've drawn a line across here so I know how far it needs to go into here. At this stage, I've also marked up some side tapers from approximately 8 inches back, as it will be a lot easier to plane these at this stage. This method is called piking, and it's very similar to the measurements on the Mary Rose bows, and it ensures that the tips are nice and fast after tillering. I'm using a number 4 plane for this job. If you get yourself one of these, try and get a second-hand older version, because steel tends to be a lot better than the modern ones. And with a very sharp blade, it makes very short work of this job. Already I'm down to my pencil line, and we can flip it over and do the other side. And again, that's all it takes. I'm using quite an aggressive rasp to take care of those very short tapers towards the tip, keeping it flat at this stage, just coming down to my pencil marks. Wood comes off very quickly using this method, so keep an eye on that template. Now we need to repeat the process on the back and the belly sides, and I've used the purple heart to centre my template. I'm purposely keeping the tip square at this stage because I want to really nail that taper. And of course, repeat that process again on the other side. Now that I've achieved the tapers, I'm going to knock off the corners, and we're going to gradually make this round using the rasp. And then once we've got it roughed out, I'm going to start offering up the horn to see if it's a snug fit. We're aiming for a very tight fit because we don't want any movement at all when we're pulling that string, because it can cause failure on the horn. So the goal here is to very, very carefully encourage the tip to be conical rather than square. We're knocking off the corners, gradually reducing the material down, and every little edge which I make with a rasp, I'm taking off. Okay, so it's quite snug, but we can obviously see my line, so we know how far it's got to go on. So it's not quite there yet, got another 1/4 of an inch to go, so we just need to remove more material and gradually tease it into place. Now at this stage, I can actually use the horn to show me where the problems are. So if I push it on really hard and give it a little twist, it will actually mark the wood and tell me where it's proud. So it's not quite fitting yet, and it's created a little step just there. So that's where I'm going to work next, but we're nearly there now. As I get closer to a decent fit, I like to routinely offer up the horn, and I must say I really like this technique of twisting it really hard onto the end of the bow, because if there are any high spots, the horn will mark it quite obviously, and it just makes life so much easier to work out where you need to rasp next in order to get this shape perfect. And it's getting close now. Now if you look carefully, you can actually see where the horns have marked the sides of the bow. It is on the side by the purple heart, which means the tip is a little bit too wide for that snug fit, and it's very fine, but with a couple of passes with the rasp, it's done. Okay, I think that's actually about there now. So it's just touching the pencil line, depending on the orientation. There's no movement in it. It's pretty solid, so I'm quite happy with that. Now, when you're working on one of these, if you find there is movement in it, you need to correct that. And if it were to say wiggle up and down, then it would obviously be pivoting on high points on the side. And if it was doing a sideways movement, it would be pivoting on high points on the back of the belly. And that's just a nice easy way of working out what adjustments you need to make. But yeah, I'm quite happy with that. So let's get on with gluing, and we shall start shaping afterwards. To glue the horn, I'm going to use a simple 2-part epoxy, And then when it's applied, I'm going to tape it up with some masking tape. When you squeeze on the horn, you need to make sure that the glue does actually escape, so there's no air left inside. So I'm just going to rotate it around until I'm confident it's on there, and give it a good push. And that's about there. To make sure it doesn't move around, get a nice big piece of masking tape, and I'm going to tape it all up. And now it just needs to dry. So we have a couple of choices on the shape of nock which we're going to go for. We could go full medieval and copy the one in the Mary Rose Museum, where the nock is actually cut on the side of the bow into the wood. Or we could go for the Victorian target style, which is much more common on retail longbows these days, where the nock is cut literally across the back of the bow, which is why it's called a back nock. We are going to go for the latter, simply because it is a laminate bow, and that is a little bit more Victorian in its nature. It means that we can use a high performance string if we choose to as well. This is the fun part. Time to shape that nock. I'm obviously using a power sander, which makes much lighter work of removing the material than by hand. It is dusty, it is smelly, you might want to wear a dust mask for this, and depending where you actually work, depends on how much material it removes. If you work on the ends, it will be much more aggressive than the top. The main goal here is to remove as much of the excess material as possible, just to make our lives easier when we come to the fine shaping. I've used the end of a sanding belt to give it that iconic rounded hook shape which longbows are known for. The important side of this is to keep control of the bow limb itself. Try not to touch it against the sanding surface, because you will create lots of little divots you have to get out later. Okay, so we have the nock roughed out from the power sander, and there's one major job which we still need to do. Apart from the tidying up, we actually physically have to shape it into its final form. So where it joins onto the bow, we've currently got a fairly square step which needs to be smoothed in and blended, partly for looks, but also so the string can slide in nicely. Now you can do this by hand with a file. It actually makes quite short work of it. It doesn't take a lot of elbow grease at all. Personally though, I'm not in the mood for sweating, so I'm going to use a Dremel. Look at where I'm positioning my hand. I'm holding onto the bow so I can really steady myself, and I'm controlling this tool. It's by nowhere near full power, but one small slip and it's very easy to mark the wood. Moving around the bow, just chasing that step, I'm keeping this tool constantly moving. I don't want to create a flat spot by hanging around too long in one place. The power sander has left the tip quite square, so now it's time to knock off those corners, round off the tip, and remove some general weight from the end. Next we're going to cut the nock into the horn, and you can use a file for this, but in my case I'm going to use a tile saw. It's about the same thickness as a bowstring. The horn is rough shaped, the string groove is cut. It does need sanding and polishing, but I'm going to save that till the end of this process. So the next time you see this bow, it will have a string on it, and we're going to start the tillering process, which is where we actually teach it to be a bow. If you have any questions about this process, feel free to ask in the comments below and we will get back to you. If you have enjoyed this video, give us a like, and if you haven't subscribed already, you know what to do. To be first in line to see the next part of this bow making saga, don't forget to strike that notification bell. And I'll see you next time at the tiller. Bye for now.